There's a name so large, it's almost meaningless. Say Shakespeare and people nod. Yes, yes, greatest writer in the English language, probably the greatest writer who ever lived, and then move on as if the claim itself is the end of the conversation. It isn't. It's the beginning of a much stranger one, because William Shakespeare wasn't a scholar, wasn't an aristocrat, wasn't a philosopher in the formal sense. He was a working playwright in Elizabethan London, writing fast, writing for crowds, writing for money. He was born in 1564 in Stratford upon Avon, a market town in Warwickshire, England. His father was a glovemaker who also held local civic office. His mother came from minor landed gentry. They were comfortable people, not grand ones. He went to the local grammar school, which was free for the sons of Stratford citizens, and there he would have received a rigorous classical education, Latin texts, rhetoric, logic, some Greek. He didn't go to university. That mattered to some people. It still does. At 18, he married Anne Hathaway, who was 26 and pregnant. Their daughter Susanna was born 6 months later. Twins followed. Then, somewhere around his mid-20s, he left for London. Why exactly? We don't know. The records go quiet. He shows up again in the early 1590s, already established as a playwright and actor, already causing enough of a stir that a rival dismisses him in print as an upstart crow, a man without a proper degree trying to compete with his betters. He competed rather well. The mythology around Shakespeare insists he was a natural genius, untrained, instinctive, producing masterworks from some divine overflow. That story flatters us. It means genius is mysterious, unteachable, set apart from ordinary human effort. The reality is less glamorous and more instructive. Shakespeare was a craftsman who worked extremely hard in a brutally competitive industry. The London theatrical world of the 1590s and early 1600s was fast, commercial, and demanding. Companies needed new plays constantly. Audiences were fickle. Plague closed the theaters for months at a time. Shakespeare wrote approximately 37 plays, 154 sonnets, and several longer poems, over roughly 25 years of active work. He was also a shareholder in his company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and later a part owner of the Globe Theatre itself. He wasn't just writing. He was managing, investing, performing, and watching the bottom line. His plots were almost never his own invention. He borrowed freely, from Plutarch, from Italian novellas, from earlier English plays, from Holinshed's Chronicles of English History. What he did with those borrowed stories is something else entirely. What made Shakespeare different wasn't the plots. It was the language, and more specifically, what the language revealed about the people using it. His characters don't just speak. They think out loud, contradict themselves, change their minds mid-sentence, say one thing and mean another. Hamlet doesn't deliver a speech about indecision. He performs indecision in real time, and we can't quite tell where the performance ends and the person begins. That's the point. Iago doesn't explain his villainy to us. He enjoys it, improvises it, seems almost surprised by how far he's willing to go. Lady Macbeth doesn't fall apart in the way tragic figures are supposed to fall apart. She dissolves from the inside, quietly, while still trying to hold everything together. The contradictions in Shakespeare's life are less about morality than about mystery. The problem isn't what he did, it's what we simply don't know. We don't know what he believed politically. He wrote kings as divine and kings as tyrants. He wrote noblemen as fools and commoners as the steadiest moral voice in the room. He worked under Elizabeth I and James I, two very different monarchs with very different tastes, and somehow managed not to offend either of them fatally. That's either genius or careful silence, and we can't always tell which. The authorship controversy, the recurring claim that Shakespeare didn't write his own plays, says more about us than it does about him. The argument usually goes, this man was too provincial, too unschooled, too low-born to have produced work of such depth and range. It must have been a nobleman writing under a pseudonym. The assumption buried in that argument is that great art requires a great pedigree. Shakespeare's life is one long refutation of that assumption, which is perhaps why some people can't accept it. We also know almost nothing about his interior life. The sonnets suggest passion, jealousy, obsession, self-loathing, but we can't identify the people he's writing about with any certainty. And scholars have been trying for 4 centuries. He went back to Stratford in his later years, bought property, became a respectable local figure, and died in 1616 at 52. He left his wife his second-best bed. People have been arguing about what that means ever since. What Shakespeare left behind isn't a philosophy you can summarize. There's no system, no manifesto, no school of thought that bears his name. What he left is something harder to categorize, a vast archive of human behavior, rendered with such precision and empathy that people have been mining it ever since for insight into themselves. His plays are performed in more languages and more countries than any other work in the Western literary tradition. Not because they're mandatory, not because some institution insists on their greatness, but because they keep working. Directors set them in feudal Japan and apartheid South Africa and contemporary boardrooms, and they hold. The cruelty holds, the love holds, the grief holds. He understood something that most of us spend our lives dimly sensing, that people are not consistent, that their motivations are layered and sometimes hidden even from themselves, and that the gap between who we think we are and who we actually are is where most of the interesting things happen. He built his entire body of work in that gap. He left us this. From King Lear, we are not the first who with best meaning have incurred the worst. Not comfort, exactly, but recognition, which, in the end, might be more useful.